Hello and welcome back to Sound Advice. I am delighted to be joined this week by Simon Barber and Brian O'Connor, who are the creators of the Sodajerker on Songwriting podcast. Now, on their podcast, they introduce their guests by giving a short biography of their careers and what they've been doing. So I thought it'd be fun to give you two your own Sodajerker style intro. So without further ado, in November 2011, two songwriters from Liverpool launched something that would dramatically change the landscape of music podcasting. United by a love for the craft of songwriting, Simon Barber and Brian O'Connor launched Sodajerker on Songwriting, aiming to create a podcast that unpacks the complexities of songwriting for those that love the creative process. The show got off to a flying start with its first episode featuring legendary songwriter Billy Steinberg, who wrote hits like True Colours, Eternal Flame, and Like a Virgin. But little did Simon and Brian know at the time that this would only be the start of an incredible journey. Since the first episode in 2011, the pair have gone on to record interviews with the likes of Alicia Keys, Paul Simon, Sting, Nile Rodgers, John Bon Jovi, and Sir Paul McCartney, with over 250 episodes with legendary songwriters in their podcast archive. Despite the prestigious guest list, the show remains completely independent and ad-free for listeners. In fact, all episodes have been researched, recorded, and produced entirely by its two co-hosts. As of recording, Sodajerker on Songwriting has been downloaded almost 10 million times, and the podcast has been featured in publications like The Guardian, The Telegraph, and NME. In recognition of their podcast achievements, in 2023, Sodajerker on Songwriting won Best Music Podcast at the Independent Podcast Awards in London. Today, Simon and Brian continue to make one of the longest-running music podcasts in the world, and have maintained their streak of world-class songwriter guests, recently interviewing the likes of Shania Twain, Bill Ryder-Jones, and Damon Albarn, to name but a few. I am delighted to welcome Simon Barber and Brian O'Connor to the show. How are you both?
Not bad,
well,
thank you. We've done all right, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we should end it there, maybe.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, good night.
So I wanted to start with, what inspired you to start the podcast in the first place? How did this whole thing happen?
It was really quite selfish reasons, wasn't it, Brian, in the first instance?
It was, yeah. We were both, we met at school. We were in bands for years and wrote songs together and stuff. I'd always had an interest in songwriting. And then when our own band dissolved, we sort of became like a little songwriting partnership, called it Sodajerker. And we were sort of starting from the ground up, really. No one knew who we were or anything like that. So we were just looking for ways to drive traffic to our site, really, and for people to hear our music. And Simon, one sunny afternoon in July 2011, he suggested we should do a podcast about songwriting. And Si, do you want to take up the story?
Yeah, so I thought we'd just talk about writing songs, and obviously no one is going to be particularly interested in us at that point talking about anything. So we thought maybe we'll try and get some better known songwriters who have audiences, and then maybe their audiences will get to know us and they might like us, and it was just a much more likely way to grow, I suppose. And so we sent out some messages to people in the hope that we'd get some replies, and we did. We got replies, as you mentioned, from Billy Steinberg. And then episode 2 with Todd Rundgren. By episode 4, we had Jimmy Webb. And so it was just a case of sort of, wow, let's just keep going and see what happens. And it snowballed from there, because once you've got a few big names, you can kind of say, well, these people have done the show. Would you like to do the show? And other people said yes. And it just kept going at the same sort of level that it started, really.
Do you think you had
I think we improved over time.
I was going to say, do you think you had a bit of an advantage in terms of, I think one of the things that I don't know if this is true, you can confirm this, but I think one of the reasons that songwriters and artists might really want to come on a show like Sodajerker is because a lot of the time when they're doing sort of press type stuff, they're sort of asked what was it like collaborating with this singer, and sort of tell me about the music video and stuff like that. But a lot of them are so in love with the process of songwriting that makes it something that they're really keen to do and speak about.
That's exactly it, really. Yeah, nail on the head. That's all we're interested in is finding out about how they write their songs, the process. We don't care about anything else. None of that sort of if there's any biographical stuff that sort of that impacts upon the songwriting in some way, then obviously we'll go into that. But and you do learn about the person. That's another thing I think is good about the show, if I may be so immodest. Is by learning about how they work, you sort of learn about what kind of person they are as well. We think anyway, and yeah, but that's it. I think it does have that appeal over certain other publications or radio shows or podcasts or whatever, that we're just interested in the work and nothing else.
Yeah, I think it's probably a nice gear change to not be asked like, who are you being spotted with outside in a London club and different stuff like that. I mean, I mentioned earlier that like since all that time ago, you've had 10 million downloads and won awards and all this sort of stuff. Do you think you could have ever foreseen when you started out that you'd still be doing the podcast today and that it would be the success it's been?
Not at all. No, we really thought, we just agreed, we'll do maybe 10, 12 episodes, see how we go, see what kind of guests we get, see if we're any good at it, and if people are interested, and if they are, maybe we'll carry on. If they're not, we'll knock her on the head, and here we are 12 years later. No, we couldn't possibly have foreseen any of it. We did aim high. We had we just, it was almost an unspoken thing from the start when we started drawing up a list of possible interviewees. It didn't even occur to us not to just try for the cream of the crop, as maybe wildly ambitious as that was. We thought, well, why not? Can't hurt. They can only say no, and there were a lot of no's. Don't get me wrong at the start, but you just need those couple like Billy and Todd Rundgren and people like that, Jimmy Webb early on. You just need those few, yeses at the beginning, and that just starts to create a little bit of momentum. And then, you can present that to future guests then, or potential guests, to say, hey, we had Todd on, we had Jimmy Webb, and then it just holds more appeal for that person rather than, at the very start when we had literally nothing to offer anybody, So we're really lucky that we got some real quality people on at the start. And,
it was thrilling, wasn't it, Bri, early on? I remember texting you about the Todd Rundgren thing and saying, he said yes. And we were both just utterly baffled that we'd landed this guest, weren't we?
Yeah.
And and to this day, we still feel that way, we're still like, wow, this person's going to do the show,
Oh, it's always exciting, when you book, a new great guest. I think when that excitement fades, it'll be time to walk off into the sunset.
Well, that's you plan to do 10 episodes and you're on 261, so you can't have gotten too sick of each other just yet.
No, and I think we've always paced ourselves as well, because we just do this ourselves. It's fully independent. We're not really answerable to anybody. Except, we would do have to sort of deliver episodes roughly around the time, say, the artist has a new album coming out or whatever. But generally, we're our own bosses. So we've never put too much pressure on ourselves to have an episode out a week or two a week or something crazy like that. We aimed for sort of fortnightly, and we've sort of stuck to that. Occasionally, it's a little bit longer because we have jobs and families and stuff. And but yeah, I think that's another reason it's lasted so long, is we haven't burnt ourselves out, and we've just done people we've been interested in, and we think the listeners will be interested in too, because you've got to think about that as well. Like, we want people to listen, we want to draw an audience to us. So that means sometimes we may say no to certain songs where we think, well, no disrespect to them as songwriters or whatever, but is that going to draw people to the show? If we're going to compete with, because there's a lot of competition now with other podcasts, then we need to bear that. It sounds a bit cynical, and we don't mean it to be, but you've got to bear that in mind when you're booking guests,
I mean, you mentioned some of the guests that you've had already, but sort of tell me about some of the highlights of the journey so far that you've had doing this podcast.
Oh gosh,
there's been a lot. I mean, we're big music fans, and so, as you mentioned in the intro, talking to Alicia Keys and talking to Sting and Paul McCartney and these people. I mean, it's like fantasy stuff for us, really. Except we remember it, so it must be real. So yeah, it's crazy. And as Brian said, we only intended to just do a certain number of episodes, but then as we've carried on each year, it's like, wow, if we'd have stopped, we never would have sat at Sting's living room table while he was playing Roxanne to us on his guitar, So every year we carry on, more stuff happens, and so we don't want to quit for that reason as well. The highlights have been numerous. I mean, there's so many episodes now. You can think back and you could pick your top 10, but then you could pick like another 50. It's for us, it's crazy that there's that much stuff now.
I'm sure one of the highlights was getting to interview Sir Paul McCartney. How did that interview come about?
Well, if I could take you back to 2013, that's how long it was in.
Wow.
It was in the works. Basically, as I said before, we aimed high. And so Paul was included on our wish list from the start. I think we even just tried, didn't we? Like, we had the the sheer audacity to contact his publicist right at the beginning, and we got a very polite brush off, which is fair enough. And then a few years on, when we built a little bit of a catalogue of episodes, we'd had Johnny Marr on, and Stuart Bell, Paul's publicist, heard that episode, so he'd obviously been keeping, track on what we were doing, and got in touch to say he really liked that episode. So from that moment, we were on Stuart's radar, and then jump forward to 2016. Paul had a greatest hits kind of compilation out, Pure McCartney, and Stuart got in touch then to say, right, okay, I'm looking at getting you an interview with Paul, for this new compilation. So we're obviously absolutely beside ourselves. And then I sort of, a couple of months went by. It cut a long story short, it fell through. It was very, very close to happen, and it just kind of fell through in terms of Paul's schedule and stuff. So we just had to go, right, dust ourselves off, and we're nothing if not sort of patient. So then 2018 came around, Egypt Station was coming out, and Stuart got in touch again, said, right, want to make this work this time. And and even then it sort of, it took a little, I don't think either of us were convinced it would happen until maybe about 24 hours before it actually happened.
Yeah. And, we had a few other things that kind of made it feel more concrete. The fact that Paul was going to be at LIPA on this day, which is the institute that he's the lead patron of in Liverpool. And we'd been to LIPA. So there was some connections kind of falling into place. So I think for Stuart and for Paul, it was basically the narrative was like, here's two guys who went to LIPA, graduated, made this podcast about songwriting, have made a bit of a splash, and now we're getting to sit down with Paul, and talk about this thing, which is basically a product of the institute, essentially, or two of its graduates. So I think they like that angle, and that's kind of probably one of the reasons that it ultimately happens, because, getting into the calendar of Paul McCartney is not necessarily an easy thing to do. He's one of the most famous people in the world, and the demands on him and on his time are extraordinary. So, if you're willing to sort of hang around for sort of, 7 years or whatever, you might just get your 30 minutes.
And even on the day, I mean, I said, we weren't convinced till like the day before, but even on the day when we showed up at LIPA, I think we were given a time of like, whatever time we were given, 4 o'clock or something like that. And Paul was doing a Q&A in the afternoon, a live Q&A in the theatre they have in LIPA, with Jarvis Cocker. And so we like attended that, and even then we're, you're just waiting for the tap on the shoulder, guys. I'm sorry, we're not going to have time today. And then, he finished the Q&A, and then we were told to, right, now go up to the 4th floor and just wait up there, and we'll, come get you when Paul's ready. So we literally went up there stood in the corridor. We were like, right, we can't waste a second of time here. So we had like the mics out the bag. We had cables coiled around our shoulders, stood there like poised and ready. And then he was doing like an Esquire interview just before an Esquire interview, which became slightly infamous afterwards. And then we were finally ushered in. So we'd actually been at Lipper from like midday, and the interview didn't happen till like 5 o'clock. So it was, but I think by that time we were just running on like adrenaline, and the nerves had kind of dissipated really, and we just were like, right, let's just go in and do this now.
I mean, he's one of as I'm sure I don't need to say, he's one of the greatest songwriters of all time. What do you think of thinking back, what are some of like the lessons on songwriting that you took away from that interview?
Well, one of the best moments in that conversation for me was where he pulled his phone out and played a voice memo. And it shows, like, even at McCartney's level and after all those decades of experience, that like any other songwriter, he's pulling out his phone, recording little snippets of things he's coming up with and hoping that they're going to be good. And that's like the same that every other songwriter is doing, so really it reveals like just the practical nature of trying to make something out of nothing. Like, everyone faces the blank page, even Paul McCartney,
Yeah, and that song ended up on his next album as well, The Kiss of Venus, which so we must have been among the first people to have heard any of that song, and the lyric to it is in his lyrics anthology as well, which came out a couple of years ago. So that's gives us a bit of a buzz.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I really hope that in Paul McCartney's phone notes as well, that they're also just as like horrendously organized and names, like Cool Guitar Thing 7 or something. That's what I'm hoping. It's just as normal as the rest of us.
Yeah, we just couldn't believe it when he just reached into his bag, took out this phone, and I felt Si like nudge me with his leg under the table, like, oh my God. And it was like, oh, he's really actually going to play us a new idea off his phone. This is crazy. It was slightly truncated. I think he got a couple of messages coming through. I think they're on the episode as well. You heard a couple of beeps. He hadn't turned his notifications off, So we might have got a little bit more. But we're happy with what we got.
Yeah. Another episode that's actually a favourite of mine is Noel Gallagher, because it's one of the ones where he's very willing to talk about his older material, which is that something that you sometimes struggle with, because obviously artists always want to talk about what they're doing now.
I don't think we struggle so much. It's just that we like to give them the respect that they deserve as creative people. And, walking into a room with someone who's really renowned and has had a lot of hits and just mentioning those hits to them straight away is a bit of a clumsy move, I think. So we tend to not do that. But oftentimes we'll get to those famous songs, and we will talk about them, but we talk about them in the context of how the work is done, and after we've built up a picture of how they operate. Because as Brian said before, the thing that we're most interested in is just how they do the work, and so we can get that answer whether we talk about famous songs or brand new songs, really.
So, yeah, I think that's why I like that one as well, is because you sort of you don't go in. He's probably heard it a million times where someone goes in and says, "So how do you write Wonderwall?" And it's nice that you sort of don't go in with that. You sort of start talking, and then it sort of comes out of it naturally. The other thing I really like about that episode, which I found just hilarious, is I remember listening to it, and I've listened to it a couple of times since, is that he spends half of the episode criticizing modern songwriters like Lewis Capaldi and Ed Sheeran for having these like big songwriting teams, and then he spent the other half of the episode talking about, oh, back in the day I nicked this riff from a T-Rex song and like just put it on one of ours, and I took the Imagine piano for Don't Look Back in Anger.
Yeah, I mean, he's great value, Noel. You're going to get that when you sit down with him, really. You'd be disappointed if you didn't. You want some of that sort of, what's that, arrogance, and we certainly got some. I seem to remember something he said to that effect, actually, about collaboration and people who have co-writers and things, ended up causing a bit of a eruption with Liam. Not that they need much encouragement to be at each other's throats, but Liam took exception to that comment. I don't know if he heard the episode or it was taken and put in an NME article maybe or something like that. And he also mentioned Richard Ashcroft, Noel did. And Richard Ashcroft tweeted him, want to explain this, Noel, or something like that. So,
Yeah.
oh my God, we're causing an incident here. But yeah, you know, you interview someone like that and you'd be disappointed if you didn't get at least a couple of contentious statements.
Yeah. But for all of his bravado, you're right, there are some contradictions in what he says. You know, he'll talk about being the man who writes the songs, but then at the same time, most of the discussion is about his collaboration with the producer, you know, who was really taking bits and pieces that Noel was generating throughout the day and then turning them into songs at night, you know. So I think, you know, there's some nuance there that maybe he's not comfortable talking about or that he just hasn't thought that much about, really. Because he is such an auteur, way that he operates.
Noel's never struck me as much of a nuanced thinker, to be honest. I mean, that with the greatest of respect.
Yeah, no, I think the other thing I really like about that is I said the producer, because he worked with sort of someone who did more like soundscapey sort of stuff.
Yeah, who was it? So was it like David Holmes or someone like that?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was really interesting because I think it's just interesting in general, like how, and it's happened in a few of the episodes where they talk about like how they work with songwriters, and some sort of do like Noel did on that album where they like really tightly work with them and the producer's almost a songwriter. And then there's other episodes where they're like, I wrote the song, I did a demo, and then we came in and made it in the studio. How do you sort of, where do most artists seem to sort of lie that? How do you sort of find a good balance with like your producer adding bits and a producer sort of still doing the sort of more engineering side of things?
I don't know. I think it's down to the individual songwriter, really, whether how much credit they want to give to a producer or some sort of whatever collaborator, you know, what they view as, you know, what is songwriting to them, you know, and for instance, you know, yeah, you could say that David Holmes on that Noel album, Noel was just playing his stuff in the studio. He'd sit at a keyboard or play a guitar, and David Holmes would go, oh, that 2-bar phrase you played there, I'm going to take that and let's loop that and turn that into, you know. Now some would say, well, you are joining in the writing process. You're identifying what the other person is doing. That's of value. Take that and loop that. And so there's an argument that's you know, you're a songwriting partner there. But no, as far as Noel's concerned, no, I am generating the music. How someone else then organizes what I'm generating, then that's, you know, all right. They're sort of they're working with me, but they're not writing the song with me. So, but other people would be very generous and say, well, this, you know, someone contributed this little riff at the beginning, or this part in some part of the arrangement, and then they get a songwriting credit for that. It's very much down to the individual.
Yeah. And I think things change over time as well. Like our next episode that we're putting out with Brittany Howard, she talks about how in the past she used to demo everything to the nth degree and get everything fixed, you know, and then take it into the studio and make the record from it. And now she's turning up at the studio with a couple of ideas and just being free with it and seeing what comes out. But that, you know, that's obviously, she's built her confidence there in her ability to not be as prepared and to go with the flow. And so, yeah, it changes over time, the more sort of skilled and confident you become as well, I think. So, yeah, it just depends.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I remember there's one bit about the man who built the moon, I think the song, which is the title track, where he's talking about how like he recorded it like 10 times and the producer went, no. And then the 10th one was the best one. And he was saying that I thought he was an idiot, but he was right. Do you think sometimes songwriters need that critical voice? Like you guys have as writing as a songwriting partnership. Do you think sometimes it's really beneficial to have another person in the room that says no? Because I think a lot of people tend to write on their own these days, but...
Oh, 100%. I think, you know, outside feedback, I mean, unless you're just incredibly confident in your work and self-possessed and, you know, like this is how it is and, you know, that's the end of it. I think feedback is always good, and, you know, a good, well, whether it's a collaborator or just person you're playing the song to, they can not only say, oh, well, I'm not sure about that bit, but they can also reinforce your confidence in an idea and make you think, oh, well, actually, you know, this mightn't be so bad. I was just listening to a podcast about The Stranger, the Billy Joel album. Classic is his sort of breakthrough album, essentially. And that had, amongst several hits, Just the Way You Are on it, which is, the standard pretty much now. But he wasn't that keen on that song. He just thought, it's a bit of a sappy, kind of cheesy, corny love song. I'm not sure I want this on the album. Doesn't really sit with the rest of the tracks. And then one day when they were in the studio, who came in? Linda Ronstadt came in, the singer. Someone else, can't remember who the other person was. But they played them this song, and they responded very favourably to it, and were like, "Oh no, you've got to leave this on. This is we got like a female perspective on the song because he was recording the album in a male environment, and when these two sort of female singers came in and heard the song, they responded to it in a different way and made them think, oh well, maybe okay, well, I'll leave it on there then, and it became one of his sort of his standards, really. So just that, I think the recording process and the writing process can be very insular, and you're very in your own head, and you can lose perspective, like any creative thing, if you're just working on your own,
And there are people who we love, who, you could argue have lost perspective over the years because they're so self-possessed and because they're so, into what they do. They lack maybe an outside feedback. It ends up being a bit of an echo chamber, and so they're making stuff which they maybe think is still just as good as it always was when perhaps it's not. Like even someone like Prince, who we worship, there was a long period in which he was making albums where we felt like, wow, I wish there was some quality control, or someone saying, hey man, but someone like Prince obviously didn't have voices around him saying, maybe let's take a critical look at this, So it can go both ways, I think. It's great when you've got someone who really knows what they want to do and they're on a flow, but at the same time, that can lead you down a road where all you do is the things that you think are good, and maybe they're not.
And we were talking about Paul McCartney, but if you look at, I don't know if you've ever heard the demos he did with Elvis Costello for the Flowers in the Dirt album. He got together with Elvis and they wrote like about 9 or 10 songs together and just demoed them, the acoustic guitars and pianos, and they can, because that was a time when Paul was a bit of a wilderness kind of creatively, didn't really know what direction he wants to go in. I don't think he was that confident in his abilities, or relatively, speaking. And then Elvis came in, and he's on record as saying that was suddenly like, it was a bit like writing with John again. We're sat opposite each other, like a mirror image with two acoustics, and just playing at each other and singing at each other, and then these songs kind of fell out, and you can hear that in those demos. You can really hear the excitement and the enthusiasm. It's like they've almost captured that moment of joy when something new arrives, in trying to write a song. Unfortunately, they didn't sort of carry that through to the finished recordings. I think generally people much prefer those versions because they capture that excitement, and you hear how Paul is responding to someone, a very talented fellow songwriter who's kind of challenging him. No one was really sort of challenging him at that point. And then Elvis kind of stepped in and did the job that maybe John was doing 20 years previous.
Yeah, I always get the feeling that sometimes these like huge names who've been around for years, they almost don't have enough people around them to have someone tell them that that's shit.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, I think music history's strewn with stuff like that. People achieve a certain level of success, and then it's a Emperor's New Clothes time.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned some already, but I wanted to know from all your episodes, what do you think are some of the best tips that you've had around sort of like writer's block? Because I know it's obviously a problem that all songwriters have at some point, I imagine. But what are some of the best tips that you sort of heard to sort of beat that kind of thing?
I think some people have said that they just don't believe in it. They just, just refuse to acknowledge writer's block. Other people have said it's part of the process. Just accept that you're not always going to be in a kind of output mode. And sometimes you're going to need to just take it easy and maybe check out some movies and listen to some music and fill the well, so to speak, before you're going to be able to think of some things of your own. Other people have said, when you've got writer's block, it's not that you can't write. You can always write something. It's just that you're not necessarily satisfied with the things you're writing. So it could just be a case that, you've lost faith in your own ideas or something like that. Well, everyone goes through phases where they produce stuff that they don't think is particularly very good. Other people say, well, go and take a walk or do a different type of songwriting exercise, or maybe take someone else's song and write new words to it. Or, there are practical exercises you can do to start to kickstart your creativity again.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really like is that it's quite inspiring listening to the podcast as a songwriter and hearing like that so many of like the songwriters that you like and the songs that you love and the artists that you love have like been through like a lot of the exact same stuff that you go through, like just not being able to write anything and just being stuck.
Everyone's starting with a blank page. It's as simple as that. There's nothing, and then if you're lucky, a couple of hours later there's something, or at least something workable that you can develop into a song. Some people, a song will happen in 20 minutes, start to finish, pen doesn't leave the paper kind of thing, and there it is. There's just an endless mystery about it. That's what keeps us interested in talking about, songwriting with all these people. It's what keeps all these songwriters interested as well. They're chasing that, whatever that indefinable thing is,
Yeah, and it's difficult for them. I mean, creativity, what we've learned is that creativity is complicated. It's not just about inspiration, it's about labor, and
decision making.
Yeah, exactly. Making good decisions on a regular basis. I think it was it Jerry Seinfeld that was on Howard Stern one time, and they were talking about, that generating material. And he said, you've got to find the torture that you're comfortable with. And that's basically what it is. It's like, it's hard. So find a version of that works for you, that you can just about stand, and then keep doing it on a regular basis. And hopefully, if you're consistent, you keep making good stuff, you'll have a career.
Yeah, and he wrote that, or he put together a book a couple of years ago of his kind of stand-up material called "Is This Anything?" Is this anything? Which is basically what when stand-up comics get together and socialize or chat, where they'll discuss what bits they've recently come up with, and they'll preface that with "Is this anything?" and then tell the other comic, and that's sort of what it's the same with songwriting. Especially if you're working with a partner, like you'll say, is this something? Can we do something with this? It'll be a riff, chord sequence, bit of melody, whatever. It's a constant, you're constantly asking yourself that question, is this anything?
And some people, like Prince, who we mentioned, they sort of swim in those waters, don't they? They get up every day, or did get up every day and just work, 24 hours lost in that process of creation. Whereas other people are like, okay, my form of torture is I need to find a slot in the day where I don't hate myself enough to, sit down and make something. And what they'll do is they'll do a songwriting exercise, or they'll do a song a day thing, or they'll join a writing group, or they'll give themselves a fixed time limit and say, right, you've got 3 chords, this line, write for an hour and see what you get, and that's how you have to find the mechanisms for forcing yourself to come up with stuff. But very little of it is, let's just wait until I feel divinely inspired.
Yeah. And you have to sort of fight your own feelings of discouragement. Discouragement is a word. But yeah, because it can be very dispiriting when you're sitting there and you're bashing away at a keyboard or your guitar or whatever, and you really, you can really have the impulse. I want to write something. I've had that. You're sitting down, right? I really want to come up with, and then you sit down, nothing arrives, and you've just got to say, right, well, okay, maybe tomorrow. Yeah. It's not happening today, but that does, you've written things before. You can sort of do it. Well, that's it. You've got to, you can do this, and just today it's not quite working, and I don't really like anything I'm coming up with, but maybe tomorrow something will happen. Tomorrow's another day.
Yeah, I mean, for all the craft that's involved, it's not building a table or putting together a chair where, as long as you get the pieces of wood and you put them together with the right joints, it will be a table or it will be a chair. You know, you can sit down and write a chorus and write a verse and have all the pieces of the song, and yet it's not a good song.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Yeah, like I think it was Justin Curry, I think, from Delamere. She told us that. He said, you know, I could write you a song right now. It'd have all the parts. It'd have arms and legs and a head. You know, but it just wouldn't be a very attractive kind of song. But a lot of these people, they know how to do it. You know, any songwriter worth their salt can write, here's a verse, right? What would the chorus be for something like, right, here's a, you know, they could just, you know, vomit out a song for you if they really needed to. But again, it wouldn't be a good song necessarily. You know, what makes something good? It's that air of why do certain songs resonate with us so much, and other songs you can kind of take or leave. Like I have real problems with songs that I think are in that category of, this just feels like we needed another song to make up 10 songs on this album. I feel like I can hear that a mile off, really, where this is just a piece of filler. They just needed something and they've just bunged together a song. There you go. Right now we've got 10 songs. And those, you know, I'd rather a really, really bad song than a song that's just competent, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much great, like, sort of songwriting advice in there. There's one tip that I sort of wanted to bring up that I heard years ago and used to this day, which is, it was in the episode you did with the band Blossoms. And one of their tips was to, that they go to record shops and look through vinyls of the kind of albums that they wouldn't make, like they were saying about like funk and soul albums and stuff, and look through like the titles and use those as jumping off points. And that's something I just want to mention because I use that to this day and I found that really great.
All right.
Yeah. No, titles are great. You know, with so many of the people we've spoken to have, you know, note down potential titles and things. And that's something we've always done as well since I think we were like school. I remember writing down like, or doing like little word association games with each other, you know.
Yeah.
And just ended up with a list of these often bizarre phrases and things, but you know, occasionally they'd find their way into a song or be a prompt for a song.
And just last question I've got for you, because you already given me a lot of your time. Thank you very much for that. You've spoken to obviously over 260 amazing songwriters in just over a decade, and this is going to be a bit of a broad question, but what do you think makes a great song?
I think the thing that keeps me coming back to a song is probably threefold. It's probably a melody that is surprising or irresistible in some way. Like it does something that I haven't quite heard before, and as a result sticks in my head. Married to a lyric that has some kind of emotional impact or a phrase in there that is special in some way, combined with a feel, like a sense of atmosphere or groove or something that is, you know, propelling me to want to listen to it again. So that if a song functions on those three levels, it's probably something I'm going to love. If it's one or two of those, then it's probably okay. Probably something I'll like, you know.
Yeah, that's it. You can really like a song, and one of those things could be missing. Like it could be the lyrics are a little facile, or kind of meaningless, or whatever. But the music is. I mean, a lot of songs are carried on the strength of the music, the melody, the chords, harmonies, whatever, the arrangements. You know, you can get away with murder lyrically, really, if you've got good music. But if you can also, you know, if you can nail the words as well, then that's it. I think we're both, me and Syed, we've got very similar tastes, really. We're just looking for a robust quality, you know, nothing sort of airy-fairy or insipid, you know, just like this, you know, a song that really sort of states itself and commands your attention. Isn't one of those types of songs I mentioned earlier, it's just kind of there and doesn't really distinguish itself in any of those ways that Sy described.
Yeah, we're interested in things that are concise and focused as well. I think, you know, things that meander and have very long repeated bridges that don't really deliver or go anywhere.
Yeah,
things like that. We're much more interested in just, you know, getting in and getting out.
Like I always say, like I'm interested in, you know, whether a song sounds like it was necessary or not. I don't know a better way to say it. You know, when the person was writing it, it was like, you know, they hit upon a chord change or a melodic leap or whatever it was, and they were, okay, right, I'm onto something now. I like to be able to sort of identify that in a song I'm listening to. Oh, you can I bet they were chuffed when they got to that bit, you know. And so many songs don't have that moment. I struggle to identify where was the moment you got excited with this. Where was the moment you thought, right, I have to finish this? The world has to hear this song, you know. And so many songs just don't have that quality, really. I think, you know, again, it's just a case of making up the numbers. I need some songs. Okay, here's a song. There you go. There's another one.
Well, as this has all been great, there's so many great songwriting tips in there. For people who want to hear sort of more songwriting tips and interviews from you, where can they find the podcast?
So the podcast is at sodajerker.com. All the episodes are there, and you can find it on any podcast platform.